The Giza Plateau. This infamous rectangular-shaped area overlooks the Nile Valley and is only 5 miles from Cairo. Here, people come from all over the world to gaze upon the pyramids and the Sphinx. But below these magnificent structures lies a slew of myths, legends, and documented evidence of an underworld so vast the human mind cannot even conceptualize its existence. What could lie below the Giza Plateau? Could it be an ancient city, a military base, or the remnants of the gods? Is it possible that whatever could be buried below the surface of this ancient area is the key to understanding the very beginnings of humanity on this planet? Greg Braden points to the first documented source of its existence.
Some of the earliest credible accounts of the Giza Plateau and what could be underneath the Giza Plateau come from the Greek historian Herodotus. It was during his life in the 4th century, approximately 4th century BCE, when he compiled a record that he called the histories of ancient civilizations, ancient cultures, ancient technologies that predate his time by thousands and thousands of years. And it was in his volume, The Histories, that Herodotus began to talk about Giza and underneath Giza, beyond what the eye can see with the pyramids and the Sphinx and the temples during his time. He speculated that there were passages, there were chambers, there were pathways. Some of them were natural, created by fast-moving water under the limestone of the Giza Plateau. Some of them were enhanced by humans at a time when this part of the world had a very, very different climate than what we have right now. Herodotus believed that it was in this location that the remnants of the ancient civilizations, such as Atlantis, were able to store the records, the histories, the writings, and examples of technologies from their time that would be preserved for future generations following Herodotus. Up until the 20th century, there were additional speculations, maps were drawn, images were created of what was believed to be underneath the plateau without actually seeing these chambers and these temples. 2 men, Henry Salt and Giovanni, were able to survey the area with the technology that was available in their time, and looking at the geographic anomalies, the topology, it led them to a place not at the plateau, not at directly where the pyramids are, not directly where the Sphinx is, but on the edge of the plateau to a little known site that is now called the Tomb of the Birds.
Could this be one of the entrances to the underworld?
We know that the Tomb of the Birds was venerated as the place of a bird god. We don't know what god, but it was most likely Thoth, the keeper of the hidden records, suggesting that this is the entrance that will eventually take us to the Hall of Records themselves. But what we do know is that overhead radar images that were taken by satellites very clearly tell us that there is a passage that goes all the way from the northeast corner of the plateau in the area of the Tomb of the Birds all the way to the second pyramid.
Although there seems to be documented evidence of the Tomb of the Birds, the actual location of its entrance was lost to the curious until April 2008, when author and researcher Andrew Collins picked up the breadcrumbs of Henry Salt.
Myself and a Egyptological researcher by the name of Nigel Skinner Simpson decided that we would try and find Giza's cave underworld. And it took a while, but finally we found 2 vital pieces of evidence. One related to the Colonel Howard Weiss, who with his engineer friend John Shea Perry investigated a previously unknown tomb in the exact area that we were interested in, which was the northwest corner of the plateau. So we investigated this site in 2007, and it wasn't easy to get in there, but we investigated it and couldn't find anything initially. And then shortly after our return from Egypt, we found these old diary notes that had been written in 1817 by the British Consul General at the time, who was Henry Salt. And he employed the services of explorers, and one of these was the Italian Giovanni Caviglia. And Caviglia, for instance, worked with Salt uncovering the sand around the Sphinx. But they also investigated the very area that we were interested in. And these diary notes talked about them going into a cave system and penetrating it for several hundred yards, and finding in there hewn chambers. And we realised that this was exactly the same location that we'd previously been to, that we were beginning to refer to under the name the Tomb of Birds. So we went back there in April 2008, and this time we looked harder and we found a small crack leading into this cave chamber, this huge, massive cave chamber. And we then began to explore and realised that this was leading into a cave system that led towards the second pyramid. But this was a very hazardous, very dangerous place. Not only could you fall down crevices, there were rocks everywhere, but there were also bats, thousands of them, and also spiders, including some that were very clearly poisonous. And we penetrated deeper and deeper into this cave system until the air became so bad that it started to affect us. And at this point we came out and I wrote everything up, but we reported it immediately to the Egyptian authorities so that they were aware of everything that was happening. And it was a strange story because not only did they initially deny that there was a cave system there and claim that we'd simply gone into somewhere that was already known about, but just a few months after this, the head of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, Dr. Zahi Hawass, was seen going into these same caves and saying that it was the best experience that he'd had at Giza. I believe that the caves that we discovered is just the beginning of a huge, great underground system that permeates a large part of the plateau at Giza.
If this is true, why haven't there been any more discoveries since 2008? It's important to note in 2010, just 2 years after its discovery, access to the tomb became blocked by a metal gate. Could authorities be trying to hide what seems to be a massive underground system?
The one thing that we know about Giza is that there is a huge cave system there that obviously has been rediscovered only recently. But radar images taken overhead from satellites show us that these caves go beneath the second pyramid and that they likely go into other parts of the plateau as well, possibly even beneath the Great Pyramid. And that tells us that somewhere here could be a series of hidden chambers that were actually hewn by either the dynastic Egyptians or perhaps even from a much earlier age by the so-called elder civilization that may well have existed at Giza as early as 10,500 BC.
If what Andrew stumbled upon was indeed an entrance to the underworld, could there be other entrances? Some experts believe that the Sphinx might hold the key.
The hunt for some kind of hidden chamber beneath the plateau at Giza really went into extra drive, if you like, with the psychic readings of Edgar Cayce. Now, he is known as America's sleeping prophet. He was born in 1877, died in 1945, and essentially what he would do is he would give these readings that would help diagnose people's illnesses, and often these past lives took place in ancient Egypt. In 1933, he started talking about something called the Hall of Records. And what he said was that this was the repository of all of the knowledge and wisdom that had been brought from the lost continent of Atlantis by the survivors, the Atlantean survivors, been brought into Egypt and stored within this hidden chamber, and that this was located somewhere beneath the plateau at Giza. He thought it was accessed via an entrance somewhere in the region of the Great Sphinx.
When Edgar Cayce's foundation, the ARE, were exploring what happened, that they were actually doing the seismic exploration during a time that I was there with another group. And I had the opportunity to see, in that time, it was a relatively primitive form of seismic exploration. They took a very large man with a very large sledgehammer, and he literally pounded onto a steel plate that was on the surface of the desert, creating the shock waves that would go into the earth, and as they came back up, if they went through an empty space, they would travel faster. If they went through solid rock, they would travel slower. That was registered on a graph, and the graph clearly showed that there is a chamber where Edgar Cayce had predicted it would be found under the paws of the Sphinx. Where this gets really interesting is that the chamber appeared to have stuff in it. What is unknown is whether or not that stuff is the collapse of the ceiling into the chamber itself, or if the chamber, in fact, is intact and is full of artifacts from an ancient, highly advanced civilization that Cayce talked about in his readings.